Welcome back to another episode of the Testudo Talk podcast. On this episode, we're going to be kind of doing a little bit of a preview of the Big Ten this year in football. We're going to be going over some win totals, picking some over-unders, and then we're going to hit you with some bold predictions at the end. I'm Emmett Siegel alongside Andrew Chodes. Andrew, we just finished up media day for the Big Ten for the football season. And this is a Maryland podcast, so we'll start with Maryland. Mike Locksley, in his press conference, said that Maryland, it's now time to start competing for Big Ten championships. Now, I think that we can probably both be in agreement that Maryland is probably not going to win the Big Ten championship this year. But to kind of kick off this episode, I'm curious, where do you think they stand in that Big Ten hierarchy, and what do you anticipate this season might look like for them in terms of total wins?
Well, I want to go back to Loxley's message, right? I think that's kind of been a repetitive theme over the past 3 years. We've had players and coaches alike, every year. Oh, if we're not a Big Ten championship contender, that's sort of a failure. But realistically, we know that Maryland's always, kind of a middle of the pack team. But without a doubt, over the past few years, they have steadily improved, maybe into that top half, top 4 or 5 teams in the Big Ten. Obviously, this is the last year of divisions, so I think every one part of the Maryland football organization will be ecstatic when they don't have to play Michigan State, Michigan, Penn State, and Ohio State every single year. So I think it'll be really interesting to see kind of the momentum they're able to build before that division split. And again, I think the goal for them, right, is to beat one of those big 3 teams, right? Because I think that kind of shows that maybe you're at the level where you're slowly getting to the level of where they want to be, which is contending for Big Ten championships.
I think I totally agree. And we've hit this point on a couple episodes now, just kind of talking about this football team for this upcoming year. And they look like they have a ton of talent, as much talent on paper as they've had really any year recently. It's, probably maybe since joining the Big Ten.
Yeah.
And you look at that schedule though, and you see 3 games that are going to be gargantuan tasks, right?
Yeah.
3 massive uphill battles. And, I'm looking here and the number I'm seeing that most books seem to be slotting them at is 7 wins for this year. So
Mhm.
when you look at 7 wins, right, you're looking at that's a bowl game. That's where they finished last year, even though they lost to those 3 teams you mentioned, and then obviously a couple more ones. When I look at that, I do lean towards the over though. I do think that this is a team that I don't see them losing more than 5 games. Now, I'm not necessarily saying they'll get to 8 wins, but I think the worst you could do there is a push personally, because I'm just going off paper. I'm not anticipating they're going to beat any of those 3 teams there, and then you get two hiccups in there. Maybe some road games that are tough, and maybe some teams are better than we expect. But I'm curious what you think about that. I would lean towards the over on 7 wins, and I'm seeing minus money on that, so it seems like the public is high on this Maryland team and kind of projected them to finish fourth in that Big Ten East. Would you agree with that? Do you think that they're the fourth best team in the Big Ten East this year?
I think they'll be either third or fourth. I don't think they'll be below that. I think. Well, the truth, right? If they can kind of take care of business in the games they should win, and then if they can maybe scoop up a win against one in Penn State, Michigan, or Ohio State, they'll have a chance to be in that top 3. Again, this is kind of a theme we talk about every single year, and they really haven't been able to get over that hump. But I think that there's a few themes we kind of have to look at with Maryland when we're looking at how they can improve. Right? I think the first thing is you have Talia Tagovailoa, right? It's his last season. Like, how can he improve in his final collegiate season? Can he finally take that next step into making less mistakes, maybe improving his deep ball? I think you have another year of Roman Hemby under your belt, right? From freshman to a sophomore, he was tremendous. Can he take another huge leap? I think you have a on paper you have a really good defense, right? Probably one of your best defenses in a really long time, but it's probably in at least 10 years. So I think it's kind of how can they grow mistakes wise? Because last year, a lot of the games they lost is because of a lot of self inflicted mistakes. So if they can cut down on those and really just play smarter football, I think you're looking at a team that kind of approaches that 9 win, that 9 win. That's probably their ceiling, and I would think that 7 wins is probably closer to their floor.
I would probably agree with you. I don't know if they'll get quite to 9 wins.
Mhm. Yeah, no, so
Um,
that's their ceiling. I think that's kind of where if almost everything goes right. I think that's where they are.
I think that's fair. And I think we should now transition maybe to talking about some other teams, in that division. The Big Ten East is so loaded. Like you said,
Yeah.
divisions are going to be gone soon. And we got to talk about the 2-time defending champ. I think we got to start with Michigan here. All right. Michigan's probably coming in on paper the favorite once again to win that Big Ten East, to probably win the Big Ten championship and then make an appearance in the college football playoff again, like they have for the past 2 seasons. Their number's 10.5, right? So, I mean, you're looking at very little margin for error there. You're looking at, they're people are saying they're going to lose one game this regular season. And, last year they went 12-0. I guess they went 13-0 before they lost that game to TCU, which was kind of a fluke. I mean, if we're being honest, they were probably better than TCU, but, that game got away from them there and, they couldn't put together a stop. But when I look at them, even though 10.5 is such a big number, and I do feel this way about a couple other teams as well. Even though 10.5 is such a big number, I would personally lean towards an over on that because I think they might run the table again. You look at that schedule; it shapes up so perfectly, and Jim Harbaugh suspended for the first 4 games. It doesn't even matter because if you look at their first 4 games, it's a complete joke. So I see Michigan once again kind of rolling their way towards at least 11 wins. I see them probably being 11-0 headed into that matchup with Ohio State. Um, would you say you agree with that? With Michigan over 10.5? I think that's probably where I would lean personally.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how it feels every year for the past literally 15 years is you kind of expect both Michigan and Ohio State to have 0-1 loss in the resume headed into the game. And like you said, Michigan, one of the top teams in the country, so physical, so skilled, dominant on the line of scrimmage. You have a quarterback in JJ McCarthy who has a genuine chance of going number one overall in a few years. Just a dominant team, right? I think that's kind of the way you can phrase it. An experienced team. This is they're used to winning Big Ten championships. They're used to being in the college football playoff the past few years. They're just so hard to beat because they do everything the right way. So I would lean towards over as well.
Now, I guess the next question would be, what do you think about Ohio State? And because they have the same number,
Hmm.
and Michigan's beaten them the last 2 years after pretty much not being able to beat them at least more than like once since the turn of the millennium.
Yeah.
So Michigan's kind of owned them the last 2 years, which is a complete
Yeah.
script flipped from before it felt like Michigan couldn't even keep up with them. Ohio State was kind of operating on a different level. Now it feels like Michigan's kind of taken the upper hand. Um, Regardless of how that game goes at the end of the year, Ohio State's schedule is a little bit harder. Do you think that the Buckeyes are also destined for 11 wins, or do you think maybe there's 2 regular season losses in there? I personally think there's 2 regular season losses in there. I think they're going to lose to Michigan again. I think Michigan at home is an advantage. And then, we'll talk about Penn State in a second, but Penn State, it seems like everything's shaping up for them this year. So what do you think about Ohio State in terms of at that 10.5 number too, if you're picking Michigan to get to at least 11?
Yeah, I mean, Ohio State's calling card for the past few years has been just their explosive offense, right? They're always top five or around there in points per game and whatnot. You have very debatably the best player in the country, Marvin Harrison Jr., a wide receiver. I think that it kind of depends if again, like the games against Michigan of recent, they've just gotten dominated on the defensive end, right? The Michigan's defense has overwhelmed them. So I think and Penn State also has a top defense, right? So I think that it's kind of those 2 games where I think they're going to be really tight. I think you said Ohio State line is 10.5.
Yeah, I mean, at least where I looked, which is
Okay.
DraftKings, I'm seeing Michigan and Ohio State both at ten
Yeah,
and a half, which are the
yeah.
two highs.
And then I think I'm not going to call myself an Ohio State expert. I'm not, but I think that the biggest question mark with them is with C.J. Stroud going to the NFL. Who's gonna take over and do they have an elite quarterback in their system? I know we've mentioned that Kyle McCord. He had some appearances last season. How will he fare with the Buckeyes? So I think their number one question mark is at the quarterback position.
Right, and we're kind of just going down the line. I guess we should jump to Penn State if we're just going down, the numbers of biggest to smallest, and we're not going to make it, all the way down to the bottom. Obviously, we don't need to, bore everyone with that. But when you talk about quarterbacks and hype coming into this year and kind of not knowing what you're going to get, Drew Aller from Penn State, this 5-star quarterback, has drawn so much attention this offseason, and it feels like everything is building for like Penn State to get over that hump. And they've been that third team, right? We talk about divisions with Maryland all the time, but I can only imagine what it's like for Penn State, just the amount of talent they've had for the past, I mean, forever, but like especially over the past couple of years, and the fact that they've been stuck behind Michigan, Ohio State, and they have that one Big Ten championship back in 2016 when they beat Ohio State that one time. Penn State's win total is at 9.5, and it feels like an over it feels like if it's gonna go over, this is the year it has to happen. If Penn State's going to break through and make the 4-team college football playoff, I mean, obviously this is the only chance they have because it's the last year of that. But it feels like everything's kind of setting up for them to put together a special season. They have to go to Ohio State and they have Michigan at home. Those are the two toughest games on paper. But Drew Aller, I think, is that real X factor who's going to kind of decide where their season goes. And it feels like the sky's the limit for him as opposed to before, where it felt like they had a bit of a lower ceiling with Sean Clifford, even though I think Sean Clifford didn't get enough
Yeah.
credit.
Well, I don't agree with you there. I've always been just watching Penn State. I've been, oh my god, this team could be so much better with a quarterback not named Sean Clifford. But we're not going to debate Penn State quarterbacks. But what we can talk about is you mentioned Drew Aller and kind of if his ceiling, higher than Sean Clifford. I mean, this is a Penn State team. I mean, they went 11-2 last year, right? Their only two losses were to Michigan and Ohio State. So I'm not going to go so much into it, but I don't see any reason why they don't go over that win total, right? Well, purely because of that reason.
Yeah, I mean, unless they stumble somewhere along the way,
Sure. I mean,
it
yeah,
but it feels like they're good enough this year, talent wise,
yeah.
to beat those two teams. I don't know if
Mhm,
they will. I would say right now, I probably wouldn't pick them to.
mhm,
But, like, I think you can make a real good case that they're a sneaky pick to win the Big Ten this year, and I
mhm,
don't even know if they're sneaky because I think they're getting so much attention now. They're almost getting
mhm.
too much attention that as I'm saying this out loud, I'm starting to think that maybe I should just fade them just because fade the public. But I don't know. I mean, they have a great team on paper. They have a great defense. They always have great linebackers. Chop Robinson, Abdul Carter. They've got such a loaded team. Their running backs. I mean, their running backs are outstanding with Nick Singleton and Katron Allen were just dynamic last year. And then obviously the new quarterback coming in. Their schedule shapes up so nicely where they have kind of a nice grace period before Drew Aller gets thrown into the fire. I mean, their first like 5 or 6 games feel like easy wins on paper that
Mhm.
I would feel pretty comfortable going over on Penn State 9.5, just
Mm.
because I think that worst case scenario for them, I see them losing 2 games. And I think even then, maybe they go over. And I could see them honestly representing the Big Ten East in the Big Ten championship game come, I
But
guess it's December.
I think that's a little bold, personally.
Think so? I guess, saying that they're going to beat one of those two teams because both those two teams are coming off playoff appearances, but it just feels like they're knocking on the door, and it feels like this might be their best chance under James Franklin since they had, Saquon Barkley and Trace McSorley a couple of years ago, and they were ranked like number one in the country for a couple of weeks.
Should have made the playoff. They got snubbed.
The year they won the Big Ten championship, I thought they might have gotten snubbed.
They got snubbed. Yeah. As you said, fade Emmett Siegel. Don't take his picks.
That's not what I said at all.
Fade Emmett.
All
What's
right.
up?
I guess we don't. We already talked about Maryland. I don't think we really need to talk much about the Big Ten East too much more. Maybe one more team. But I'm curious who you like out of the West, at least in terms of most wins in the regular season. Um, Wisconsin's got a new coach. Iowa, we kind of know what they are year in year out. Minnesota's hanging around. Nebraska's got a new coach. Kind of an interesting division. So is there anything that stands out to you in the West in terms of, we're talking about win totals, any teams that you like maybe to fade or to kind of ride this year?
I'm saying this purely of how last year ended. I don't know if they're going to win the division, but I think who's going to have a really good season is Wisconsin. I think once they made their coaching change last season, I think there was a lot of positive momentum that went into that program. I think there was more hype around it, and I think they kind of were slowly getting back to where they usually are. So I think that's a team we can see probably compete for one of those top two, top three spots. But I think they're going to have an impressive season regardless.
I mean, Wisconsin's going to be like, if you've watched Wisconsin, I mean, it feels like
It's
forever,
boring
right?
football. It's boring football.
Yeah, but this year they're running the air raid this year. It's going to be, I mean, it's going to like blow everyone's mind. Like, I don't know if it'll work, but
Yeah.
just watching Wisconsin this year and seeing them throw the ball around, I mean, I don't know how that's going to work in that Wisconsin weather in like November. But I
The,
mean, Tanner Mordecai coming in, like they're going to be throwing the ball a lot with Luke Fickle.
the thing about Wisconsin is that in a lot of games, even if they lose, they always compete, right? I mean, yeah, looking at their schedule, they had some tough losses last year, but just off the top of my head, just over the past few years, tell me if I'm wrong. It kind of feels like they're always in games. They always match the physicality of other teams, and they're always a team you can kind of never count out, right?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, even like teams like them, like when they had that string where it felt like they were playing Ohio State every year in the Big Ten championship game.
Yeah,
Like when you're that physical and that talented, like
yeah,
up front,
You can match up
and
with anybody.
and especially like that physical on defense, like even if you're not going to win because Ohio State just has like better athletes, like you can hang around at least, and you're not going to get embarrassed, which is the kind of thing that wins you games later in the season when everyone's banged up and the weather gets cold, which is obviously
Who,
prime.
out of curiosity, who is the odds on favorite? I don't know if you have it up. Who's the odds on favorite to win though with the West?
So what I'm looking at here is I see Wisconsin as the highest win total at 8.5,
Yeah.
and then Iowa's at 8, and Minnesota's at 7. Those are the three
Okay.
highest regular season win totals. I mean Wisconsin, I guess that would make them the favorite. I kind of like Iowa over 8. I like the idea of them winning that division, to be honest, and I think that their defense, like we know all the stuff about their offense, right? We know like Brian Ferentz this year. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but their offensive coordinator, he's the coach's son. Everyone was begging for him to get fired last year, and he gets an extension with arguably the funniest contract stipulation I've ever seen. Is that they have to average 25 points per game this year, or else he's fired. So that means, including a bowl game, they need 325 points this year, which is going to be. I mean, I can't wait for people to start. They're going to start running up the score in games and stuff. But I just think their defense is so good that even if their offense is like marginally better than last year, and that is not saying much because I mean they scored. You remember they scored the Iowa touchdown in week 1. Where they had 2 safeties and a field
I was
goal
gonna,
for
yeah, I was gonna
7
say, the
points.
game they won. They beat, like, what was it? They beat, it was North Dakota State.
South Dakota State, I think
Yeah,
it was.
yeah.
And yeah, I mean their offense was it was painful to watch. I mean their best player is their punter, but
What
like
score they?
if their offense is like marginally better, like I think they got to get to at least 9 wins. It feels like
Is
they
it?
can't possibly their ceiling might not be super high, but their floor just seems like higher than almost anyone else's.
Isn't McNamara the starter there now?
He is, so I guess if they were to play Michigan, that would be was it last year's quarterback battle?
The Cade McNamara revenge game. Ooh, Michigan fans will laugh at that.
That was who they played. Was it Iowa Michigan 2 years ago in the Big Ten championship game? I'm pretty sure it was.
I don't remember, to be honest. I don't know if you were planning on doing any more predictions, but I do think something we should address, just because we are podcast and we are student journalists. I think we should just discuss briefly the situation going on at Northwestern, and just kind of give our thoughts on that. Do you want to start and just kind of give your brief thoughts on that? Because I think that is something important that we do need to discuss.
Sure. I mean, Northwestern, the situation there, and football aside, right? We'll get to the football in a second, but just like the situation there, just like, I mean, what a terrible situation. Like all the details, just like reading those stories from the student newspaper up there, like it was terrible to see. And obviously Maryland has had its fair share of scandals, recently, and you can kind of see what that does to a program, and to see some of the stuff that was going on behind the scenes and the toll it was taking on their players. I mean, it was just like it's just awful, and there's no need for any of that stuff in sports. There's no need for any of that stuff anywhere. It just feels so unnecessary, and like Pat Fitzgerald was on that list, I would say, a couple years ago, and obviously they had a terrible year last year, but Pat Fitzgerald was on that list maybe a couple years ago of guys you would say is like unfireable, right? Like he's an alum, great player. He's had more success there than almost anyone else. But when stuff like that comes out, I mean, you just have no choice. He had to be let go. The whole thing where they suspended him and then decided to fire him later was a bit confusing. The president feels like he kind of screwed up, and now there's all sorts of stuff, allegations of other teams in the
Mm.
athletic department. It just feels like such a mess, and just
Yeah.
such a terrible situation in every
Yeah.
regard.
No, it's such a mess, and it's so, well, it was tough to read, but it's so disappointing for, obviously, that student body, those student athletes, for the conference as a whole. I mean, it's not a good, it's not a good look, and the focus should always be, oh, how do I phrase it? I mean, the focus should always be on football. That should be that should be the priority, because these other situations should not be happening. So again, it's just really disappointing to read about that it's happening. And do you want to give a football related prediction for them?
Yeah, I mean their number I'm seeing for wins this year is 3, and
Yeah,
I'm definitely taking the under. I
yeah,
don't know if they're gonna, lose more than 9 games, but there's
yeah.
no way they're winning 4 games this year. So I think at worst you're getting a push there.
Yeah,
I
I
think
mean,
I
yeah,
think
I mean,
they're probably gonna be the worst team in the Big Ten if we're being
correct.
honest.
Yeah, your coach is gone. It seems like there's transfers leaving every single day. Yeah, I'm with you. Under three.
Yeah, I mean, would you say Northwestern worst team in the Big Ten this year in terms of overall wins?
Uh, I mean, I think Rutgers is always going to be kind of at the bottom as well. I think it's going to be a competition per se between Rutgers and Northwestern.
Rarely do I say this. Like you watch Maryland, and Maryland is like we talk about. They have a lot of talent, but Maryland is not in the level of talent where they should be like embarrassing other Big Ten teams. But when they played Rutgers in the last game last year, I mean, it just didn't even look like those two teams belonged on the same field, which is crazy to say because, like, I mean, we're talking about two teams in the same conference here, and one of those teams isn't even like an elite team in that conference. And I mean, Rutgers was just so awful. They're gonna have the same quarterback this year, who's supposedly very talented, but I don't know if they just don't have the talent around him or what. But just yeah, I their number I'm seeing is at 4.5, and I'm way in on the under on that one. I think it's at least 8 losses for them.
Before we move on, just to kind of round out the East Division, I think do we have a consensus that bottom three, Michigan State, Indiana, Rutgers, Maryland, floor is fourth, and they have a chance. Their goal is to get top three. Is that what you believe as well?
I think so. I think those 3 teams ahead of them might just be too difficult.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, I would say that that's probably fair. I mean, Michigan State, another team. You talk about transfers out. I mean, they don't really have a quarterback this year, so they're no. I mean, their win totals at 5.5. I'm under on that one. I don't think they're winning. I don't think they're making a bowl game this year, personally.
I mean, I think I mean you can't win half the game, but I think around a push. Right? I think that 5 win total is probably most
Yeah,
likely.
I mean, it's probably a fair number. I would say it seems like the public is. I mean, I'm seeing minus 165 on the under. So it seems like people are really out on Michigan State. I guess that's, part of the nature of not really having a quarterback from last year. And, there's all sorts and they lost, Keon Coleman, arguably their best overall player. So not great situation this year for them, at least where they were relative to past years. But I think we should wrap up this episode with some bold predictions. They don't have to be like the most flaming hot takes ever. We're not going to predict Rutgers to run the table or anything, but you can start us off. I want to hear what you have to say because I know you're a self-proclaimed hot take expert. So
No, no. I'm not a hot take expert. Just sometimes some of the things that come out of my mouth with sports related predictions just make absolutely no sense. So I worked hard to make sure that this one actually makes sense and is logical, and I actually people might agree with this. I am gonna go with the take that Caden Prather will lead all Maryland receivers in yards this season.
interesting. I actually wrote down that I think Tyrese Chambers will lead all Maryland
I think.
receivers in
Well,
yards this year. So
I'll
it's
add
kind
on
of
to that.
interesting.
I think that transfer combo. I think the two of them are going to combine for some pretty good yardage. But I think Caden Prather. I mean, he had a really good season last season at West Virginia. Was creeping towards 600 yards, and he was really like the third, fourth option. So I think, and also, I mean, obviously you lost your two best receivers, Maryland, and to the draft. And I mean, you kind of look at Prather's probably the wider 2, 3. I mean,
And
Jay Sean
behind, yeah, Jay Sean Jones number one, and
Deshaun
then
Jones,
the
Ty
next two guys.
Felton around there, Chambers.
Yeah, I mean, so and then also like Corey Dyches is going to catch a ton of
Well,
passes.
okay, yeah, that's
But I
fair.
mean, yeah, he's not a receiver, so I don't think we're counting him.
But
I also wouldn't expect him to pass either of those guys in yards
yeah,
anyway.
so I would not be surprised if Caden Prather gets like 700, 750, climbing to 800 yards and is close to the top of Maryland's receiving yards list.
All right, I think that's fair. I just went with Tyrese Chambers because I think that I could see more volume for
Yeah.
him. I just think that kind of the way he plays maybe opens himself to more receptions. I don't know if that's gonna. I don't know if he's gonna provide like a huge downfield threat. I also don't
Mm-hmm.
know if Caden Prather's gonna do it. I don't think anyone will know until the season starts. But yeah, I think a lot of people are expecting big things for Talia Tungavailoa and that passing attack. As always, I'm gonna throw out my boldest prediction to start because I just talked about a quarterback, and we talked about this guy earlier. And I don't even know if I believe this, but I'm going to put it out there and I'm going to stand by it. I think JJ McCarthy might win the Heisman Trophy this year. I think JJ
Oh,
McCarthy is going to win the Heisman Trophy, not necessarily because he's the best overall player, because I think Caleb Williams is the best quarterback in the country and Drake May's right behind him. But you just look at that schedule that we talked about. And I mean, those first like 4 or 5 games, he's going to put up insane numbers, right? And I know they have a great running back, so they're going to run the ball, but I have a feeling he's going to put up crazy numbers, and you're going to get to that point in the season where they're 11-0 and they're playing Ohio State, and he just needs a big game, and then he's going to hit the Heisman pose like Desmond Howard in the end zone. I can see it in my mind, and Michigan's going to beat Ohio State, and it's going to be JJ McCarthy's team, and then they're going to be back on their way to college football playoff. So if I'm giving out a bold prediction, I'm going to say JJ McCarthy. It's not a bold take to say JJ McCarthy is the best quarterback in the Big Ten. But I think JJ McCarthy statistically might have the best year of any quarterback in the country in a power conference.
I honestly don't think that's a hot take, but I'll give you an actual hot take. There's 4 finalists for the Heisman, right? Or is it 5?
It's normally 3, but sometimes I think a 4th has been invited before.
2 Big Ten players will finish top 5 in voting: JJ McCarthy and Marvin Harrison.
Marvin Harrison, like, man, it's so hard to win it as a non-quarterback nowadays. I know Devontae Smith did it, but man, I mean, you can make a really good argument he's the best player in the country at any position.
I think he's close. I mean, he's really good. He's really good.
Yeah, I mean, he's on that short list with like Caleb Williams and Harold Perkins down at LSU, and there's all sorts of players you could throw in that conversation. But yeah, I mean, he's a special player. I mean, it's not going to happen because you have 2 pro-ready quarterbacks in this draft. But like, I think in a lot of years he would be the number 1 overall pick, which is crazy as a wide receiver. I mean, he's probably gonna be like a top 3 pick in the NFL draft, which is pretty rare for a guy at that position, I feel like. All right, this will be my last one because this has already been a little bit longer episode than maybe we anticipated. We talked about Drew Aller a little bit before, and you mentioned this guy's name. But I think that Kyle McCord is going to be the best first-year starter in the Big Ten this year. And when I say first-year starter, I'm not talking about incoming transfers. I'm talking about, first-year starting for big team. I just look at, like, Drew Aller. There's so much hype around him.
And there's so much hype, right? That's the question.
Yeah, like, it's so hard to live up to that hype. And Ohio State is just such a perfect situation to step into and put up huge numbers when you got guys like Ibukwa, and we mentioned Marvin Harrison. They're such a loaded team, and they're going to play in such big games that I feel like he's going to be thrust in that spotlight, and I feel like he's just going to shine out. I love Drew Aller, by the way. Like the second he came in, that I think it was week 1 against Purdue, and he came in and like I saw one pass, and I was like instantly like, I love this Drew Aller guy, and I love him as a player, but I just don't know if statistically he's going to have that same season because their running backs are such a big part of that offense that I can see a scenario where maybe, and I know we're going to disagree on this, but I can see a scenario where maybe after that Ohio State game, there's maybe some people being like, oh man, like, Drew Aller, like Sean Clifford might not have been as bad as we thought he was because he managed the game well and he was experienced and he was a veteran and he knew what he was doing with the offense. And maybe Drew Aller takes some chances. And this is not a Drew Aller hate as much as it's just I think the situation at Ohio State for a young quarterback might be better than the situation at Penn State.
Fair point. It's fair. It's a good point. I mean, we won't know until the season starts, but it's logical. It makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, now I've said that the Ohio State and Michigan quarterbacks will be the 2 best quarterbacks or whatever. Like, I know that's not exactly a hot take.
Yeah, that I personally think we have to wait and see for Ohio State, but makes sense. Ohio State, you kind of put into a perfect situation.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to see, but yeah, I don't know if you have anything else. I don't want to make this episode too long, but I think that's about everything. The other thing I wrote down was that Iowa will win the West, but we kind of already went over that, so I don't feel the need to elaborate too much more on that. So yeah, I guess that'll do it for this episode. This, I guess, unofficially, kind of officially marks the beginning of preview season for the football season. We're super excited. Over at testudotimes.com where we do writing, we're gonna kind of kick it into gear early next week with some of our Maryland football previews, and we're going to be previewing the Big Ten at large. We'll have more preview episodes right here on the podcast feed for you guys coming up. So yeah, thank you guys for listening as always, and we'll see you next week in the next episode.